Hello, this will be part 7 of this series of New York and the Hermetic Code. With a focus on one specific building, but I will be connecting and showing the comparisons between several other very important buildings and pieces of infrastructure, iconic pieces in the city of New York. And the focus of this one will be on Trinity Church, which just short of Wall Street, become quite well known, especially during the September 11 and the follow-on. But also the Twin Towers themselves, especially the North Tower, and that's the one with the transmission tower on top. But also the Woolworth Building. This is, I mentioned the World Trade Center, I've touched on Trinity Church. Woolworth Building I went into in a bit of detail in a previous episode. Also the Manhattan Bridge, which detailed in a previous episode. And so to show how these structures, but others such as the Metropolitan Life Tower by Napoleon Le Brun, Woolworth Tower by Cass Gilbert, and so these, especially these architects which I'll be mentioning, are very important in the early through to relatively recent period in New York. And another one where we will be drawing comparisons and showing how this same method carries through is Bush Tower by Harvey Wiley Corbett, again another very important influential architect. Nearby the Bank of America Tower, which I touched on earlier. But so the focus will be on Trinity Church, but I'll also then showing comparisons between these other buildings to show that individually it's interesting, but the point of it is that there is a method which is being carrying through. Now, everything which I'll be showing here I've covered in detail in Washington, Brasilia, Astana, Sydney, other places such as Perth in Australia, Adelaide in Australia, Canada and Winnipeg, and many other places. So it's not just about one particular building, but if you draw a comparison between many, you'll see that this method carries through, and this is one very tangible, very aspect of the Hermetic Code which you can sink your teeth into. It's measurable, it's repeated, it's observable. But the Trinity Church here, down near the very south tip of Manhattan Island. Now, it's 1669, I think, was the original church was built. This is the current church, and it's a very important place in regards to New York because, well, it's south of Wall Street, so it's in the earliest periods, going back to the Dutch era when this was first become a church, although the current building come after that period. But it was also by an important architect, Richard Upjohn, who was founder of the American Institute of Architects and also the first president of that organization. So again, as with these other architects mentioning, it's not just some random guy, some cherry-picked building. These are very important, very iconic structures historically, but also architecturally. And again, if you read through, there's plenty. You just do a search and you can read much more into these, many more of the details. But an interesting point about the church is that the elevation is 33 feet. Now, that it was put there and that it was measured, even I used to think, well, that's not important. But with so many of these structures, such as Sydney, Mrs. Macquarie's chair in Sydney, and I'll try to remember to put the link in description because it's a road and a chair. You might think there's nothing there, but the use of measurements, connection to Freemasons, her husband being hugely important, basically like the George Washington of Australia, not just for social aspects, but also for architecture and street design. House of a Temple in Washington, 33 feet high columns, 33 of them. The Indianapolis Scottish Rite Cathedral, the Tyler's Room, a cube of 33 feet, 330 feet long. I've done plenty of videos to show that this 33 symbolically, but also 33 feet in measure, is very important. Now, the Trinity Church was in the shadow of the Twin Towers, and it was very important. Now, this is I think this was the first year anniversary after the collapse of the towers, and an interesting ritual in regards to the arrangement. I think these are police officers doing it coming in, and part of the. I'm pretty sure it's the first year anniversary, but there you might get a hint of that, because there is not just in New York, across so many other places, architecturally, socially, in terms of organisations, the importance of and the contributions by Oddfellows, Freemasons, and Templars. All these organisations, it can't be overlooked. But there's a grave in Trinity Church, and there are more than a few markers now. The G with the compass and square is obvious, but even if, say, one example of his gravestone, which has a cipher, a script there, but also the symbols such as the hourglass with the wings, that's a funerary symbol. Now, I've done a video on funerary symbols and how they connect through, but also the chalice with the flames, the compass, the square, and the plumb bob are all very important symbols. They're not secret at all. Also, Alexander Hamilton, the first Secretary of the Treasury, featured on the $10 bill, and there is his gravesite. Now, he was not a Freemason, or at least there's no records of it, but so many of the founding fathers were. They basically built the Republic, and yeah, it's a point I've mentioned before. But anyway, Iking465. Now, I couldn't find his original comment, but he did ask a question about Trinity Church and mentioned how it's in the National Treasure movie, which is very much just like earlier episodes I talked about Ghostbusters, and how the early history then gets retold in a fictional way. But there are well, it's based on truth, but it's just been Hollywoodized and extended out. Now, under the Trinity Church in the building, the Templar treasure was contained there, and again you see a Freemason chart, and how the 13th step on the York Rite is the Knights Templar. And the Trinity Church symbol here now, what was the name? Charmed was a show about witches in San Francisco. This is San Francisco being another centre, but here you can see from the Vesica, and then from the triple you get that symbol. So it's also based in the sacred geometry, as they call, or geometry, because these are elements Euclid's elements contains this geometry. So it's not it goes back to Euclid. Icking also pointed out that the Twin Towers, as well as the new Freedom Tower, which I sort of mentioned a bit earlier, points towards Trinity Church. Now, whether that's intentional or not doesn't really matter anyway. But now, the thing is, with all this research that I've done, you find that Wikipedia first page search will give you incorrect information. For instance, if you do a search Trinity Church height, you get 248 feet, while the same Wikipedia article will give it 281 feet. Given that so many other sites across the world use these whole numbers, not this sort of unbalanced one, sort of either way, but again you'll find that other sites will give the correct measures, which is 280 feet, and this was repeated through many other churches and structures across the world. So and Richard Upjohn being the architect, and so important in architecture schools and stuff. So it's a curious thing that so often that they get these things so wrong. Now, 280 feet, so there's a breakdown in hands, palm, inches, fingers, and grains. Now, to begin with, it's 1,120 or 1,112. So weights and measures for Vesica itself, for cogs in Chartres Cathedral, chakras in the human body, there are meant to be 114 on the outside, 112 in the body, but also Geber and his alchemy there were 112 elements in that. But the Manhattan Bridge and the New York Times building, which we'll be comparing, also have this number, but also the Metropolitan Life Building. now will also at 10,080 grains. The international standard was this, so it was contemporary to the new building, the new Trinity Church. This was, it was contemporary at the time in regards to weights and measures and how the Great Pyramid connects to so many other things. You can pause this to read it a little bit more, but also 1008 years, 336 as well, and the Great Pyramid itself 756 feet, being 1008 span. But another nice point about that number is that there are 10,080 minutes per week. In Eastern tradition, Rosicrucians also have this number of hold this number of very high importance. And it's also interesting to note that the circumference of the Earth plus the circumference of the Moon is 10,080 miles. Again, the same number of minutes per week. Time, the clock and the compass, Sun, Earth, Moon and stars, geometry, music, arithmetic all blend into this method. Manhattan Bridge and New York Times building, you'll also find that they contain that number as well. But at the Doric scale, so you use a tracing board, and this is going back to Greek times, probably much older than that, but this is a bona fide system of measurement that converts to 9,450. Now, the Salamis stone is an excellent example because not only does it contain Doric and Ionic, it also puts this allegedly modern foot 1,500 years earlier to around 500 BC at least. But why is 945 so important? Well, in Egyptian royal miles, or the royal mile in Scotland, that's the radius of the Moon is 945, but on July 4th, or aphelion, when the Sun and Earth are at their maximum distance, that's 94,500,000 miles. And Declaration of Independence is commemorated on July 4, was actually signed earlier. More than a few this was a point that was to connect it to an event of astronomical importance as well, which is a key feature through this whole field of study. Now, 945 will also connect the Bank of America, Manhattan Bridge and New York Times building. But this connection of Sun, Earth and Moon, this is not the only one. So we have again, it's a repeated theme, and it's commemorated in many ways and weights and measures, especially if read through, for instance, the tracing board with the Doric, Ionic and Corinthian column, as well as the symbols of Sun, Earth, Moon, stars, geometry being key features throughout all of them. And also, as we move on now, in inches it converts to, so 280 feet, the Trinity Church converts to 2,953.125 Samian feet. Samian feet are also embedded in the Salamis stone, Samian as in Pythagoras of Samos, more than a few very important ancient philosophers, geometers, astronomers come from this. But why this is so relevant? Well, this is one of the most naturally occurring, very important number, because the 30-day month is actually 29.53 days, give or minus, depending on the elliptical orbits. But it's also, if you multiply the diameter of Earth by 29.53 days, you get the distance from Earth to the Moon. So the Moon orbits the Earth every 29.53 days. The Earth multiplied by 29.53, including 29.53125. This is, again, there's a slight, because of the elliptical nature of things, there's always a slight margin. And that also will connect us to the Bank of America Tower, twice mentioned in Doric and Ionic, as well as the Manhattan Bridge, as well as the New York Times building. And so this, again, the themes, now, where did, Freemasonry, or Masonry is architecture and building and engineering going back centuries, going actually back thousands of years. And the great cathedrals, the older temples incorporated these ideas. It's not secret. It's not outlandish. It's not an invention. It's well known and documented, and it's just some people really have a hard time. They just want to call this a coincidence, or assume that it's got to do with some darkness or whatever. No, it's got to do with great engineering and about putting things in plain sight. Now, for instance, artists frequently, the great artists would tell stories with the background pictures. Now, we would focus on the main character in the great artist, but they would tell stories hidden in plain sight. The great craftsmen would build hidden compartments into their furniture. This was part of the philosophy, the mindset of the time to do beautiful things. But the Trinity Church in the Cremona scale, that's 240 feet, and 24 hours a day, the size of the Earth, digits. The Vesica, beautiful number from the Tetractys, the Pythagorean Tetractys, which has, if we add them, we get 10. If we multiply them, we get 24. Greek letters in the alphabet, even perigee. So when the moon is closest to the Earth, it's based on this number 24 AU, and a astronomical unit being the basis measure in astronomy. But also you'll see it connected through, for instance, the Twin Towers and the Metropolitan Life Building as one example. Also earlier the three, but that converts to 720 hands. Now, in the last episode I went through 772, especially in detail, but it's Sun, Earth, Moon, geometry, biology, new weights and measures, old weights and measures. And it's interesting that room temperature 72 Fahrenheit converts to Kelvin at 295.37. So this such a small margin of error brings us back to this previous connection of Sun, Earth and Moon through the synodic month, and also the distance scale, naturally occurring cycles as well as man-made cycles, man-made weights and measures, proportions. It just folds in on itself. This is built on a natural system and arbitrary man-made measures, but it's connected, and it's quite obvious when you look at all of them. So even the Mayan and Indian connections in ancient Egypt, Judeo-Christian stories, Far Eastern traditions such in Chinese, not only in literature but also in the martial arts, and even in like acupuncture and these things, you'll find that these same numbers all the time. It also will connect to the New York Times building, the Twin Towers, as well as to the other three. Which ones are they? In any second now? Okay, yeah. So all three of these particular ones, and it's now you can see also Harvey Corbett, Caskill, were also Masons as well. And again, the Mason tracing board tells historic, ionic, weights and measures, geometry, astronomy. It's all there. But at 2,880 inches, well, this is probably one of the most, amongst these very special numbers, this ranks very high. Well, there you go. Especially it's in four dimensions. It's the most beautiful number. And again, I linked it to some previous episodes, but there's 4 dimensions. People such as anyway, again, this will connect to different, again, these same important buildings in New York, modern ones, older ones, historic buildings, have the same method going on. And once more, you get it to, just like, what can you really say in regards to that? So it's also at 8,640 grains. Once more, this is a number which connects the Sun and the Moon in the modern mile, the Royal Babylonian ancient scale, 86,400 seconds per day, the Vesica, New Jerusalem, the Dapara Yuga, New Jerusalem, and the Ark of Utnapishtim, which was the model of this, which goes back to, very close to the beginning of officially recorded history and civilization. The Epic of Gilgamesh deals, weights and measures, tells his story, Code of Hammurabi, but also, again, you'll find how this method is repeated across all these different structures. Also, you'll find, so for instance, 96 and 3,840 or 24, 96, 348. This will also connect to the basics of a geometry which emerged from the flower of life, and so we build up the stars, which connects us to Bode's law. And again, this mentioned in earlier episodes, how I posted some links, how which of course this method and numbers also repeated in these other key structures which I've been mentioning. So it's not just one building, it's how this pattern follows through. So if you look at them, you read the heights, you think, well, there's nothing connecting them. Well, it's actually quite a bit connecting all of these structures, and it's music, arithmetic, geometry, and astronomy. And so, just to review, the Trinity Church is just one example of this, and again, if you watch through the previous episodes, just in New York, it's just repeated all the time. Capitals, cities, well, you'll find London, London, Paris, Sydney, Brasilia, Washington, Canberra, and Astana, and the great cathedrals, the ancient temples and buildings such as the Colosseum, the Parthenon, temples in India, Angkor Wat, all of them have this same method, and the official history will tell you that the foot is relatively modern, and will give you a bunch of old wives' tales in regards to these things, because the meter weights and measures, so metric weights and measures, connect wonderfully to imperial weights and measures. Now again, the standard excuse is that they're all separate, they have no connections. That is just nonsense. That is so, it's shouldn't be selling it. People shouldn't be buying it, because it can be weighed and it can be measured and it can be illustrated through history in written records, but also in records such as the Great Pyramid and the temples of the ancients. So with that, hope you enjoyed and have a good one.